Carney's plan for the country, a plan the Prime Minister hopes will unite Canadians in the face of threats from the South.
We are seeing the danger of over-reliance on the United States. We're spending over 75 cents on every dollar of capital spend for defense goes to the United States.
Right.
That's not smart. We look to Europe, we look to Asia, we look to new partners.
In our one-on-one conversation, the Prime Minister lays out some benchmarks for his government. When can you expect to see change?
One of the things that's going to characterize this government is being straight with people. We are in a crisis. We have to get moving. We have to get moving on these major projects.
Plus, new insight into Carney's relationship with President Trump and what Carney is hoping to get out of trade talks with the U.S.
The Oval Office was the end of the beginning, reestablishing sovereign-to-sovereign dialogue. The President is recognizing, as others are, just how strong and free Canada is. We've got more that we need to do before we're satisfied.
The full interview is just ahead as Power and Politics starts right now. Prime Minister Carney, thank you for meeting with us today. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, David.
I want to start, if I can, with a moment near the end of the speech that drew some sustained applause when the King said, as the anthem reminds us, the true north is indeed strong and free. Very subtle. Was that for a Canadian audience or for an American one?
Well, I think everything is for Canadians first and foremost. Speech from the throne for setting out a bold, ambitious plan for Canada, the government's plan. And I think a clear message there that we are strong, we are free, and it's time to reinforce those strengths and those freedoms.
How much progress do you think you've made since the Oval Office meeting with President Trump on resolving some of the issues around trade, in particular the sectoral tariffs?
Well, I would term it this way, since we're at historic moments, epoch-making, to quote the speech from the throne. So to be slightly Churchillian, it was the end of the beginning. The Oval Office was the end of the beginning, reestablishing sovereign-to-sovereign dialogue, much more constructive engagement on some of the big issues on both security and economics. We've had fairly intensive discussions since then. Minister LeBlanc, for example, and our ambassador were down for a number of meetings last week. Conversations continue. We've got more that we need to do before we're satisfied that we have a partnership that is in Canada's interest.
But how would you characterize it? I mean, have you moved closer? I mean, he's going to be in Canada on around the 15th of June for the G7. Yep. Could you have a deal by then, a deal by Canada Day, or does this sort of thing that moves into maybe the CUSMA review time period, which Mexico is now saying could start in September?
I don't think it's in either of our nation's interest for it to drag out that long. I think the issues are getting a sharper relief. But we're going to take as much time as necessary to get the right deal for Canada, but no more.
Okay, but so do you agree with the Mexican economy minister, I think, said today, end of September is when CUSMA starts? Is that the period between now and then that you think you can have this resolved with the United States?
I have a slightly different view. I didn't see the specific comments, but the actual CUSMA review period starts in 2026. So look, there are specific issues, the border, fentanyl, tariffs. Canada's made tremendous progress. We're securing our border. You heard the speech from the throne doing even more, another 1,000 border CBSA agents, border services agents, another 1,000 RCMP personnel, a series of other measures which will exhaust our interview time if I go through them to secure the border. So we're making huge progress. The amount of fentanyl going across our border is down 90%. We're less than 0.1% of the U.S. imports of that horrible drug. And the bigger issue now is northbound drugs and guns. So look, we've made a lot of progress. We think we should be moving off of those tariffs. The U.S. should be moving off those tariffs. We are stronger together in autos. The auto pact's been in place my entire life. I'm not that young anymore, so it just shows you the value of being together. Same with steel and aluminum and the other trade challenges. So we want to make direct progress on those issues before we have the broader review of USMCA.
On the relationship, though, overall, Prime Minister, I mean, there seems to have been progress on at least
without question, there is progress, David.
For sure, but on the recognition of sovereignty, right? The president said he still likes the idea of the 51st state, but he's not going to talk about it. Ambassador Hoekstra has said
that me playing in the NHL, David, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely fair. But he still talks about getting the auto sector, the president does. He still has the tariffs against the auto sector and talks about making it economically unviable to make cars in Canada and to move it to the United States. So the economic threat still persists.
One of the issues for the United States, and by extension for Canada, is can the U.S. auto sector be viable and truly competitive versus Asian competition, particularly coming Chinese competition, but broader global competition? Can it be viable if it's just an American auto sector, or U.S. auto sector? The answer is no. And Canadian, we have a great auto sector, great auto parts sector, and that integration of the auto sector is part of what will make North America competitive, and that's what we're working towards. A
line you said with some frequency during the election was, he wants to break us so he can own us. Do you still believe that's true?
I think the president, I won't look into his soul, but I think the president is recognizing, as others are, just how strong and free Canada is. And so if you look at the speech from the throne today, as you did, this is about investing in Canada. This is about building Canada, about making one Canadian economy out of 13. It's about nation-building projects. Each of those and those together give us much, much more than could ever be taken away by trade action. This is a confident country moving forward, and it's an exciting time.
Look, I do want to go through some of the specific measures from the speech from the throne, but just one more on the United States, because when you said the process of deepening integration is over, is that a permanent state of affairs in your view? Is that something about the changing nature of America as a country, or is it specific to this period under President Trump?
Well, I'd roll back 40 years since we're looking at the broader sweep of history, maybe even a little more. A steady process of integration, integrating the auto sector, as I mentioned when I was first born, then moving to broader goods, services, financial services, even some people talking as little as a few years ago about having a customs union with the United States. Greater freedom of movement of labor. That's not going to happen. That reliance, we are seeing the danger of over-reliance on the United States economically and also from a security perspective. So we will, as I said the other day, we will cooperate where necessary, when it's in both of our interests very clearly, but we won't necessarily cooperate. So we, as a confident country, with an ambitious plan, we look outwards. We look to Europe, we look to Asia, we look to new partners that we're going to deepen with. And that's a big element of what we're laying out in the speech.
So when you look to Europe on the security and defense arrangements, is that to sort of augment the ones that exist with the United States, or to reduce the reliance there? Is it a hedge or a replacement?
Well, it's both. Diversification depends. Look, and I say it's both. I'm not trying to avoid the question or be clever. The point is, we need to do much more to secure our borders, to secure our Arctic, to secure Canada. So we're going to need to spend more. We recognize that. Now we're going to do it in a way that is in the best interests of Canada, with partners on which we can rely, get best value for money, but also make more of that investment here in Canada, so we're growing jobs and livelihoods in our own country. You know this, some may not have followed as closely. We're spending over 75 cents on every dollar of capital spend for defense goes to the United States. Right. That's not smart. What's better if we spend more at home, if we have diversified partnerships. Look, part of what's been happening in the last few months since I became Prime Minister is a number of conversations of increasing specificity with our major European partners so that we become defense partners with them, that we become part of a very big build-out of their defense industrial base, which will have big benefits for jobs here in Canada. We're making great progress on that, and by Canada Day, we'd like to see something concrete there.
Okay, but you also...
Canada Day is going to be an important date in our calendar.
What do you want to see on Canada Day specifically, sort of on the defense side of things?
So you see a couple of things by Canada Day will happen. First, we have...
Tax cut and free trade, right?
Well, we have a tax cut, middle-class tax cut, and first item that we put on the table as government following being elected is go straight to affordability, that tax cut for 22 million Canadian taxpayers, up to $840 a year for a two-income family. So real money for people delivered on July 1st. That's the first bill. In fact, the Minister of Finance tabled the Ways and Means today in Parliament. But on defense, two things. One, we have a summit, EU-Canada summit, just before the NATO summit, third week of June. At the NATO summit, NATO partners are going to be asked to spend more, to do more, for mutual protection. We're going to participate in that. But part of the way we want to participate in that is with new partners, with European partners, yes, with the United States, yes, on our own, in a way that's best for Canada. So look for some agreement and some progress in both of those.
But Mark Rutte said, I believe it was yesterday, that they think the target, forget 3.5%, they want to go maybe as high as 5%. Now, that feels like an aggregate number maybe for the alliance in general, but Canada is not at 2% and won't be till at least 2027, maybe a little bit later. Can you reasonably commit to something even beyond 2 at this point?
I think there's a couple of things. One is, we start with results. What is necessary to secure our country? First and foremost, our borders, the Arctic, our sovereignty. Then what do we need to do with our partners in NATO, for a safer world that has an impact on Canada, and that would include our commitments in Ukraine. What do we need to do? Then what could it cost? Then how do we get those costs down, and how do we make sure those expenditures benefit Canada as much as possible? I'm not a fan of picking an arbitrary number and then trying to figure out how to spend up to it.
Well, we have committed to it as a country.
All of that said, sorry, David, is we are definitely going to have to spend more. We are going to have to spend more sooner. That's one of the reasons why we will have a fall budget, not a budget tomorrow, because we're part of these deeper discussions on the defense side.
Okay, I want to dive into sort of the 7 priorities in your mandate letter. What appears to be a mission-driven approach to government, I would take from that. The list is limited, but each one of them is quite broad in terms of what fits in there. But I want to ask specifically about housing. And now, I know you said you don't want to force down the price of existing houses. You want to reduce the cost, increase the affordability of new builds, but the GST cut at the front end, driving down development fees to make it more affordable while driving up wages. So buying power, it makes it easier to own a home. So like a simple measure of that is the price to income ratio. And over the last 20 years, that has just gotten impossibly unbearable in a lot of big markets. Like 20 years ago in Toronto, it was 5 to 6 times an average salary. Now it's like 11 to 12. What sort of a ratio are you aiming for with this policy? What's an affordability standard for
it comes back into several things. Now you've asked a very complicated question and you've layered it down, and the bottom line is for Canadians, can I get a mortgage? Can I afford the mortgage payments, and I can buy the house? Part of what's shifted is the length of those mortgages and the cost of those mortgages. So there's multiple factors that have to happen here. One is we've got to get take-home pay up for Canadians. The first easiest way to do that is to cut taxes now. We're cutting that middle-class tax cut. That's why that's the first thing we're doing. Cut taxes on first-time home buyers, younger Canadians. They're buying a new home, saving up to $50,000. In fact, in some markets, Toronto would be an example, more than $50,000 off the price of a home. That's all, the big money, obviously. Then we need to get supply up in order to get that. At the same time, and we have a very ambitious plan, you'll see that roll out more into the fall setting of Parliament for that to roll out, to get supply up, double the rate of home building, all while growing the economy, because what we need to see is incomes grow. So you combine all of that with mortgage terms, you've got to pull collectively, we've got to get those numbers back, those ratios you quoted, back towards those that you started with.
Well, what's the horizon here? I bought my first house at 28. So if you're a 28-year-old now looking to buy a home, it's tough depending on where you are. Like, how old will you be before it gets to that affordability level?
Look, there is no, here's an insight, there's no monolithic, there's different types of houses, different types of housing markets. It's a segmented market, first point. Second point is, are we building houses more cheaply? The answer is we have to build those houses more cheaply, and there's several ways to do that. Again, cutting GST on housing, that's one way to make the house more cheaper, sorry. The second thing is to cut development charges. So we committed in the platform, we will cut development charges in half. Development charges flow through, that's a fancy word for building the infrastructure for houses, it flows through to the end price. So we're looking at another savings on the order of magnitude of that $30,000, $50,000 off the price of houses if we do it and matched, or as we do it and matched by the provinces. Third way you do it is you change how you build houses. So much more effectively, the productivity in the housing sector in Canada has not grown for a quarter century over the period of time that you quote those figures. We've got to get that down. You can do it at scale. You can do it with prefab, modular. You can do it using Canadian timber, Canadian technology. That's what we want to catalyze.
Right.
Last point, David. We're going to focus first and foremost on deeply affordable housing. We have a homelessness problem in this country. I think everybody knows it. There's multiple causes. One way to address it is actually to have deeply affordable housing. We're going to focus in on that. That is a role for government. It's a role for the federal government to catalyze and then move out across the spectrum to affordable housing. Mainstream affordable housing is going to drive.
But this is a medium term. This is like 5, 7, 8 years. Is that what we're talking about?
We're more ambitious than that, but you have years, not weeks. And you know what? One of the things that's going to characterize this government is being straight with people. Okay, there are things we can do in the short. First off, let's be straight. It's a sunny day. It's beautiful out there. We are in a crisis. We have to get moving. We have to get moving on these major projects. We have to get moving on building one Canadian economy. That is why the First Ministers, the Premiers, and myself are meeting next Sunday in Saskatoon, because we have to get moving. That's why a number of the Premiers are here in Ottawa today. That's why some of the Western Premiers have banded together on some big ideas that we're really looking forward to getting behind, and on and on. So we got to move, but the idea that, I'm not saying you suggested that we can just snap our fingers and all of a sudden housing in this country, a housing crisis will be solved overnight. No, that's not going to happen. But that's not a reason to wait. We're going to get going.
Well, it's the same thing with the major projects, right? And you set me up perfectly for where I wanted to go, was looking ahead to Saskatoon with the meeting with appreciate it. You know, it's time to build. It applies to houses, projects, and the relationships. The premiers all have a list of national projects that have big price tags and require federal approval and federal money. I mean, are we going to see
federal approval? I'm not sure about federal money. Yeah.
I think they might think it involves federal money in some cases, right?
Well, so here's if I may. Do you want to finish your? Sorry.
Well, no, I just wonder, are we going to see specific projects out of Saskatoon? These are the 2 or 3 priorities for this year, next year? What are we going to see in terms of moving this?
What we're signaling in a bold, ambitious plan that's part of the speech from the throne is that we need to move on these nation-building projects. So projects that bring Canada together, projects that diversify our economy, projects that help us export to new markets and really move this economy forward. So yes, the ask of provinces, the ask of the private sector is, which projects do you have that reach those criteria? What we're going to do is fast-track the approval, truly fast-track the approval of those projects. And we are going to name specific projects to which these fast-track approvals apply, so that the country can get moving. Now, part of what we're going to do collectively, in effect, we're going to have a competition with projects. Some projects are good ideas, but they're not ready. Others are ready, but they're bad ideas. Some projects can purely be driven by private sector interests. If the federal government and provincial governments can make approvals quickly, so investors can have the uncertainty, other projects may provide such benefits to our country, in terms of diversification as an example, and jobs, that it may make sense for there to be some support in some way by the federal and provincial governments. But we look at all of that, we designate the ones we want to, we collectively want to move forward. And when I say we very much include Indigenous partners, Indigenous peoples, because this free, prior, and informed consent applies to all of this and will apply to virtually every project will have an Indigenous component.
Okay, I know you've got to go, but I need to build on the project question. I need to ask you about Alberta, and I need to ask you about the oil and gas sector, because I know you said you want to create an energy superpower, clean and conventional energy. A pipeline is a possibility, but not a certainty. And Alberta would say 1 at minimum is what is needed, maybe 3 to the north, to the east, and to the west. This is what the Premier has said. Is that a reasonable expectation for the Premier of Alberta? And the frustration over this, and you know as someone who grew up in Edmonton, it's driving a lot of the resentment to the national government of Alberta. So as Prime Minister, how do you confront that?
I think there's a couple of things. One is, let's recognize a few facts in terms of pipelines that have been built to Tidewater and projects opening up, whether it's TMX, whether it's Cedar LNG, and beyond. There's a series of LNG projects. More can be done, more should be done, and from our perspective, more will be done. So we will be moving through this process to make these types of projects possible. Now, we don't begin and end the conversation. It's remarkable in some circles, this conversation starts and ends with pipelines.
But that's what it's become politically, right?
No, it's not. No, that is not what it's become politically. That is not what it's become for Canada. Canada is a nation. Canadians want, yes, they want energy pipelines that make sense. They also want grid connections between our clean grids. They want actually less carbon. So they want carbon capture and storage pathways project to move forward. They want broader corridors, for example, Gray's Point in Nunavut, that open up whole swaths of the country to new trade. They want critical minerals so that we are sovereign in the most important components of the future. All of those things are possible. And the more we're doing more of them, the more likely this is going to succeed. That's why these meetings and this process is so important. That's why the legislation that we're putting forward, we will put forward in coming days, is so ambitious. We are in a crisis. We can control our destiny. We are a brave, bold, confident nation. We are the true north, strong and free. But freedom is something you earn every day. And that strength is something we need to reinforce.
But how do you confront the separatist sentiment that is there in Alberta? There's a possibility of a referendum next year. I mean, how do you approach it?
This is the greatest country in the world. And this is a country that works. It's a government that's committed to working with Canadians across the country. And I know you're pressed for time now. You're pressed for time. One of us, we're both pressed for time. I got things to do. We got projects to build. But I was born just north of the oil sands. I grew up just south of the oil sands. When I was born, the oil sands was a concept. And it was the ingenuity of many Albertan engineers and entrepreneurs, and the partnership between the federal government and the provincial government that made the oil sands what they are. This is what we need today. We need all of the actors, private sector, we need research, we need scientists, we need the federal and provincial governments working together. And what's going to happen, and I do feel that this spirit is building, is that we're going to see the projects we're talking about aren't just contained within one province. So it needs multiple provinces, it needs Indigenous partners. And the only way to get it, in my view, is to recognize what a moment that we are in, the need for ambition, the need to work together. And I tell you, David, you saw some of this, I'm sure, in your coverage. I traveled across this great country over the course of the last several months. That's what Canadians want. We're going to go to the wall to get it.
Prime Minister Carney, I know it's a busy day. I appreciate your time today. Thank you, sir. Okay, so that was my exclusive interview today with Prime Minister Mark Carney. The power panel's been listening in on that, and I want to bring them in now for some analysis and reaction to that. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist and the co-host of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Look, a large day, a King's speech and the Prime Minister there. Sherelle, just your quick takeaway, what stood out from what Mark Carney had to say there in your view?
Well, he clearly has an ambitious agenda. He clearly has plans in his mind. I know that the opposition Conservatives say that Mark Carney has no plan. He clearly has a plan. What is still missing, I think, for me at least anyways, is how was the method, and how are you going to get there? There was an interesting comment that Bloc Québécois leader François Blanchet made today. He said he views Mark Carney as kind of like he says that Mark Carney sees himself as the CEO of Canada.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Or he's approaching it like a CEO.
He's approaching it as a CEO, and he puts out the order. The provinces are the regional offices, is how Blanchet put it, and everybody else has to kind of fall in line and make things happen. And maybe that's the case, and maybe that is oftentimes the role of a prime minister as the head of government to set the direction and move forward. But I do think that people are still looking for, okay, but how are we going to get there?
Tim, what are your thoughts, your high-level takeaways?
Yeah, I just build off something Sherelle said. He is taking a different type of leadership approach than we've seen in a long time, back almost to the Paul Martin era when transformation was in until it wasn't. I'm all for what he's talking about in terms of transformation. What is fascinating to me is he seems to could care less about any political expectation management. That may be a good thing, that may be a bad thing, but it's a reality. He's setting up a real interesting set of KPIs, key performance indicators for himself. You tried to get some specific ones off of him, but he seems unencumbered by the worry that most politicians have that, ooh, I better keep things down low.
Yeah, the
so
laws
that I
of
can
political gravity don't scare
seem
him.
to so we'll see how long that lasts, and maybe he does succeed, but he certainly set up potential challenges around expectation management.
Yeah, Amanda, that's kind of my take too. Expectations, they're above the Golden Dome, with Prime Minister Carney.
Well, nothing can shoot anything down, I was going to probably say.
What are your thoughts on sort of what he said there? Because he expanded on a few things that we'll go through one by one a little bit, but your high-level takeaway there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some themes that will be really appealing to Canadians. I think we saw them in the throne speech, and they were reinforced again in this interview, this idea of how important it is to unify the Canadian economy, going from 13 economies to one, the way that he describes it. This idea of diversifying our trading partners and then getting to work at home on affordability, things like the middle class tax cut, and home building. And these are themes that we heard in the campaign, but I see some of those themes really solidifying for him. And whether or not you like the CEO analogy, I think the way that he's delivering will be welcome. It's a refreshing change. He has a point of view, he has a direction, and you really get the sense, while we may not know all of the details of the plan, my takeaway is he's going to get stuff done.
Well, he's going to try, Jordan. There's a lot of things that can stop it, but right now he certainly has political capital and some political momentum. What are your thoughts on what you heard from the Prime Minister there?
Well, he certainly brings the energy of a shareholder pitch meeting to to the task, and I do think energy is part of it, right? Signaling that change, that engagement, that is a real shift from what we saw under the Trudeau government. So, look, I mean, this is a very ambitious agenda. Tim's absolutely right. They're not doing anything to tamp down the scope of these expectations. And I think part of it is the hope that some of that energy can carry them forward. Now, I will say, I think I was struck in his remarks, there's a lot of stuff in here that is achievable in a short time period. So things like the interprovincial trade barriers, already there's really good progress on that. That seems likely to beat its target. Reaching out and working with the Europeans on defense, this makes a lot of sense. There's ready pathways for that. But when I look at some of the things in here and in the throne speech today that actually touch on Canadians' lives, you're coming up with sort of not a whole lot. Like really, it's the income tax cut, which is $800, a little bit more than $800 a couple, and it's taking the taxes off some home purchases. But like I got to tell you, for the half of Canadians who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're not one tax cut away from changing that. So the problems that underlie the lack of popularity that we saw for Justin Trudeau in the dying days of his government are still there. And I question whether they're going to be immediately touched by this agenda.
A question, though, on that. Do you think the issue with sort of the unpopularity of the Trudeau government at the end was that those issues were there, or they didn't seem to be a priority?
Yeah, I think it's both.
Do you know what I mean?
I think it's both. And I think that there's certainly a risk here for Prime Minister Carney as well. One of the things that the Trudeau government, over time, it became increasingly disconnected from those struggles that Canadians were facing on affordability and things like the housing crisis. And I think that with Prime Minister Carney, you have somebody walking into that role who, yes, brings incredible strengths in terms of international networks and competence on financial and fiscal matters, but who also does bring a sense that this is not a guy who knows what the prices are at a grocery store. So for today, that's not a problem, but as we go down this path, that could become an issue for them.
All right. Okay, look, one thing I want to play is a segment from that, and this is when I asked him about what's going to happen in Saskatoon next week, because he is meeting with the premiers. The first ministers are going to meet for a couple of days. Scott Moe is going to play host, and it's about the issue of these projects of national significance. And Wab Kinew was here yesterday and suggested we're going to get news out of this next week, that we're going to get specific projects. I asked the Prime Minister, about that. Here's what Mark Carney had to say.
We need to move on these nation-building projects. So projects that bring Canada together, projects that diversify our economy, projects that help us export to new markets and really move this economy forward. So yes, the ask of provinces, the ask of the private sector is, which projects do you have that reach those criteria? What we're going to do is fast-track the approval. Truly fast-track the approval of those projects. And we are going to name specific projects to which these fast-track approvals apply so that the country can get moving.
So, Tim, it's interesting. It's not just talking about moving fast. It's very quickly, like within a week, we're going to get names of specific projects coming out of Saskatoon that this is what we're going to fast track, at least in the first wave of these projects.
Hallelujah, if he can pull it off. I mean, what I really found fascinating in the throne speech that the king read, I think he said project reviews down from 5 years to 2 years. That will be a world record-like pace. Let's see it, because there is lots of development there. But I go back to something else he said to you. You know, you can't escape, nor should you, your duty to consult with Indigenous peoples.
Of course, yeah.
So the premiers may be here. The federal government may be there. In the areas where Indigenous consultation is important, our Indigenous partners and others there, and maybe they are. But again, I think he is trying to use the turbo. He keeps calling this a crisis, and it's a really smart thing to do, because as Amanda will tell you, any of us who have worked in crisis communication, there's a greater imperative to move. So as long as people believe that they are still in a very difficult period and quick decisions must be made, they will throw away perhaps other considerations. I'm not saying that's disingenuous by the Prime Minister, and I think we probably are, as long as Donald Trump there is in some kind of crisis, but can he continue to funnel that, and for how long?
But, you know, just on that, there is what Mark Carney is saying of getting alignment on review processes and on timelines. It's still making sure you do the environmental considerations and the Indigenous consultation processes. And then it's what is in Bill 5 in Ontario, where a cabinet can declare things essentially commercial zones where you don't have to meet regulations, you don't have to meet laws. David Eby in British Columbia with Bill 15 doing a similar sort of thing, not quite to the same extent of Doug Ford. I know they want to move fast, but there's a risk here. If you move too fast, you start trampling on the things that the throne speech says you need to protect.
Yeah, but it seems like it's a risk they're prepared to take. And right now, I mean, this is, I don't know what the critique has been of these things in the throne speech yet. I've not seen or heard them. But usually if there is going to be a critique, it comes rapidly, it comes quickly. I'm not hearing it. So he may sense he has a broad public audience that's prepared to give them some space and then course correct after the fact. Yes, it comes with risk, but that seems to be what it is.
And it's also the possibility his premiers at the provincial level are
we'll see
moving
what happens
faster than maybe he's comfortable. So I have to see on that. But, you know, Sherelle, this is a big part of, you know, the Carney promise. Quick decisions, quick action, quick moves. So, you know, depending on what comes out of these meetings next week, we know the Western premiers talked about, you know, an economic corridor getting to the port of Churchill. Wab Kinew has talked about this, you know, as a big priority for him, because it also opens up things to the north, gets resources to Tidewater. I mean, it sounds like there's the potential for actual real news from a summer meeting between the Prime Minister and the premiers.
Potentially, which would be interesting. But there's something I do keep coming back to, which is a word that he used, the Prime Minister used, and I can't immediately recall if it was in direct correlation to these specific nation-building projects, or if it was later on when he was talking more about energy. But he used the word competition, and he said that there's essentially going to be a competition for these projects, and that kind of sets up a really interesting dynamic, because now you essentially have people fighting over what is going to be, you know, which of their projects is going to be.
You're picking winners and losers, right?
You're picking winners and losers. Who is going to be the most nation building of the nation? Who is going to be, you know, the putting forward something that is supposed to be seen as more important? So as that comes together, and I do think that's where we will start to see, you know, everybody will be talking unity, and everybody will be thinking, okay, yes, we want to move forward. We want to move forward quickly. However, there's always going to be that thing in the back of everybody's minds going, oh, but what about me? And why aren't you prioritizing my project?
Right, and Amanda, that leads you to potential regional tensions, obviously, and intra-provincial tensions. But it strikes me that the competition that the Prime Minister is talking about there is between the private sector proponents of the specific projects to try to get them to do what they can to get into the fast-track process. And he also pushed back that unless it's like a massive nation-changing project, don't expect big bags of federal cash to go into it, which I also found was interesting.
Yeah, he was pretty direct on that point. And listen, I think a couple of things. I think that agree with Tim. He's using the circumstances of our times. He's using the crisis as a catalyst to be able to push some of this forward. He's also using this kind of unity building, country building dialogue, the kind of rhetoric that is about, you know, let's pull together this critical time. We're going to diversify our trading relationships. We're going to look internally, domestically at all of the riches that we have in this country and how we're going to utilize them to the greatest extent. But then he's also addressing one of the biggest criticism, not just of this government, but of any government, and that's the slow pace to get projects to market, right? Any kind of project. And so he's saying, I'm going to move it from five years to 2 years. We're going to set up a major federal office. He didn't say 2 weeks or 2 minutes. It's still 2 years. And says that we're going to be able to do that by addressing some of the long-standing things that we've all talked about as not getting in the way, but presenting unique challenges like environmental considerations, obviously constitutional obligations, Indigenous peoples' issues surrounding some of these projects. So saying these are the things that if we're going to move these projects along and we're going to do it quickly, we're still going to do it in the confines of our reality. But I'm going to have the buy-in of the provinces to get it done, and I'm going to bring the private sector along for the ride.
But you know, Jordan, the calibration on this is going to be really important, right? Because industry will complain that the pendulum swung too far one way under Justin Trudeau. You look at Bill 5, you look at Bill in Ontario, Bill 15 in BC, you can see the pendulum swinging too far the other way, and then environmental considerations and certainly Indigenous considerations, people get anxious, right? So it's finding that Goldilocks spot on this, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's a sense, you know, sometimes you hear this talked about that all that's missing is political will to speed up this process, and that's just not the case. There are real political and material and environmental and rights trade-offs around a lot of these projects, and that's why they are difficult to get approved. And so that doesn't disappear just because we now have a little bit more national consensus about moving things forward. So that's going to all be compressed into this process. But I do think that, you know, one element of what he's doing here that's smart is that, you know, the federal government doesn't appear like it's going to be picking winners and losers. They're really leaving that to the provinces to do.
Yeah.
And so each premier has their own set of political incentives to expedite development in their own provinces in specific ways. And so what Carney is talking about there is partnering with provinces for projects that are already going to be sort of successful within that own province's framework, and then working to bring those forward more quickly. And so I think in a certain sense, that's a way that's a little bit smart to get around some of that notion that the federal government is picking winners and losers among the provinces. Now, the question is, of course, what are premiers like Danielle Smith going to say about this?
Right.
Are they going to take yes for an answer on this, or are they going to continue to insist that this is not a sufficient pullback from the federal government on that?
Right, and on the picking winners and losers comment, just to clarify, I think the First Minister's table will be picking the winners and losers. Like, I don't think it's Mark Carney dictating it, though. I do think it's going to be a harder sell. For example, Doug Ford's tunnel under Toronto, which he thinks is a national project, I think is going to be hard to get buy-in for everybody on that. You know what I mean? But on that, the trade-offs, this is going to be the question in terms of rushing things to a point, right? This is what they need to watch for here, because that's where the backlash can come in, especially with the progressive side of a Liberal voting coalition.
Of course, and not even just a backlash among voters. There are very real consequences to not getting these processes right. Indigenous communities have legal rights in terms of free, prior, and informed consent. And if those rights are not respected in the course of these consultations and these reviews, then they will have recourse to the courts to slow and even stop projects. And we've certainly seen that in the past in Canada, and I would expect that we will see that again if these processes are not meeting those benchmarks. So there is possibly a sweet spot to be found here, but the reason that this hasn't been done in the past is because it is very difficult to do.
Right, and look, on that, there's been no more difficult big project to get done than a pipeline. And pipelines have, for economic reasons, for political reasons, for environmental reasons, it has fueled frustration and some Western alienation. And I talked to Mark Carney about pipelines and Alberta separatism, and here's what he said about that.
It's remarkable in some circles this conversation starts and ends with pipelines.
But that's what it's become politically, right?
No, it's not. No, that is not what it's become politically. That is not what it's become for Canada. Canada as a nation. Canadians want, yes, they want energy pipelines that make sense. They also want grid connections between our clean grids. They want actually less carbon. So they want carbon capture and storage pathways project to move forward.
Tim, what do you make of that? You know, a pipeline is a probability, a possibility under Carney, but not a necessity. Alberta would argue it's a necessity. Certainly that's what Danielle Smith has put on the table. How do you view his answers on that issue?
I think he's being as evasive as he probably needs to be at the moment. He's not gone all Stephen Guilbeault, nor do I expect him to do so. I think he is looking for others to do the work there. Look, we've had what Quebec recently suggests that, maybe these things aren't so bad. I think he's trying to play and get a feel for where others are going there. Pipelines, yes, to your question, have become a symbol. You only need to look at Keystone XL. I mean, that was Biden's first big move to shut that down and the opportunity that it provided. But I also get in his comments, David, and in the comments of his energy minister in Calgary last week, that they are
That's
at least
a big change.
Well, and as you always say, until they prove us wrong, let's look at what they've said so far. Hodgson, first speech, says, it's about delivery. It's about getting things done. Carney has not backed away from that. He has not put 14,000, he's been a bit evasive, but he's not put a million caveats on it all. And in other places, he said he's not opposed to a pipeline. So we should expect, as he is calibrating and looking at options, that a pipeline of some variety or two could be in the mix.
Well, sorry, you want to jump in there?
Well, I was going to say, and we'll see, right? Because right now this is also a hypothetical. There's no project
proposal.
proponent. There's nothing on the table. So it's a lot easier to be enthusiastic about a notional project than it is about a real one that has more intense political trade-offs. And I would also say that it's not even so clear necessarily that approving a pipeline is sufficient to get a check mark on that in the minds of voters in resource-intense regions. Just look at the Trudeau government. They purchased a pipeline in order to facilitate it as an economic project and are still given credit for blocking that type of development. So it's not so clear that in practice this actually works out quite that way.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make, Cheryl. There is no proponent right now. There's no project to green light, but there's certainly not I don't sense a hostility towards the idea. It's a question of where it goes. But, the expectation, the political expectation, certainly that Premier Danielle Smith lays out, it's like she wants access to the north, access to the east. Now, maybe the Churchill Port option that, has been floated satisfies that. David Eby doesn't seem to like the Prince Rupert idea, even though it's not quite where Northern Gateway was going to go. But what do you make of the political risk there and the needle the Prime Minister's threading?
Well, it is a needle that he has to thread carefully because, look, he has to be the Prime Minister for the entire country, not just for Alberta or any other oil-producing or energy-producing, conventional energy-producing region. He talked about, it's not. He tried to say that, this isn't necessarily what the question is, because this isn't all that Canadians want, and I do think he's right on that. Not everybody is clamoring for a pipeline. Not everybody is clamoring for more oil sands development, and he has to walk that line because, like I said, he's the Prime Minister for the whole country, not just for Alberta.
Right, but Amanda, there is a stated desire for a boost in productivity. And, it's crude, but crude boosts productivity if you can do that. And there is, it creates jobs, it creates wealth, it creates revenue. Look, I'm not here for my looks. But, it is also, the absence of it does create this frustration in Alberta that needs to be addressed in some way. So what do you think of the approach they're having? Because Tim Hodgson did lay out a pretty open view of the fossil fuel sector that we maybe didn't, well, not that we maybe, that we haven't really seen in 10 years from the Liberals.
Yeah, so I think a few things. I think obviously in the throne speech, the words, we will become the leading energy superpower, part of that speech, he talked directly in reference to pipelines and projects. In your interview, he said more can, should, and will be done. So I think both the way that he communicates about pipelines, as well as Canadians' appetite to have a discussion in a different way, has changed. I think that this is a significant difference from what we saw from the Trudeau government. And I think even the willingness to be open to these conversations, because the world has changed and because Canadians understand that we have to get our resources to other markets, allows him to be able to be potentially, I think, a little more broad in his language. But at the same time, this is an area where he is actually setting some expectations. He pushed back quite a bit. These aren't the only projects, he says, right? And he talks about the grids, and he talks about carbon, and he talks about other projects in the north. And if this government is able to start laying some framework to have a broader conversation about some of these projects, I think that's really interesting territory for him, because pipeline has become sort of the catch phrase that takes it all in, as opposed to the number of things that could be done across the country, which really we're not talking about the same degree.
Can I just add something? Because I think that there's something we're right on top of that's really important. There's a real brand remake happening here on two levels, right? Whereas Justin Trudeau, fairly or unfairly, was accused of making Canada too woke and closed and focused on very niche things related to the Prime Minister. Mark Carney is now saying, hey, Globe, which you know me, I'm a global player. We're open for business. That's why he's not saying no to anything. He's also very deliberately stepping forcefully away from everything that was the previous Trudeau government. He's borrowing Harper government branding, energy superpower, new government, and that in and of itself is a degree of audaciousness that he may end up getting inflamed by it all in the end. But this is a big brand remake, and he's trying to show himself as, you may have trouble with the guy a little further south, but the guy up north, he wants to do deals. He wants your money. He wants to play. And that's the world Carney knows. That's why people, I think he thinks, elected him.
But, Jordan, I wonder, I agree, right? He wants to say, we are a port of calm and stability with abundant natural resources, and we're going to train up our workforce. Your money is safe here. Look at the deals we're going to have with Europe and with Asia. But the pipeline thing with, open to it, but not emphatically endorsing it necessarily. I think it comes back to a point your podcast partner, Corey Tonight, made, that what Danielle Smith is advocating for are projects that go through 4 provinces. And once, on her terms, let's just do it. And you just can't do that as a prime minister in a country structured like this one.
That's right. And that's not the only problem there. If you look at what is one of the biggest factors creating investment uncertainty in the oil sands right now, yes, it's Trump and tariffs, but it's also Danielle Smith and separatism, right? You have an environment that's becoming very difficult for investment, in part because there's political instability around some of those questions. So I think that there is a big gap still between what we're hearing from Prime Minister Carney and what you're hearing from Premier Smith. And I expect that we're going to see more fireworks around that coming out of the First Minister's meeting next week.
Right, maybe that's why it's in Saskatoon. They're going to bridge the divide right next door. Look, as a pivot away from the United States, they're looking at deeper integration with the European Union, in particular on defense. The Prime Minister is suggesting that, look, he's off to a couple of summits, NATO, European Union summit, and they want to have some sort of an agreement in place by Canada Day, another Canada Day deal. Have a listen to this.
We're spending over 75 cents on every dollar of capital spend for defense goes to the United States.
Right.
That's not smart. What's better if we spend more at home, if we have diversified partnerships. Look, part of what's been happening in the last few months since I became Prime Minister is a number of conversations of increasing specificity with our major European partners so that we become defense partners with them. That we become part of a very big build-out of their defense industrial base, which will have big benefits for jobs here in Canada. We're making great progress on that, and by Canada Day, we'd like to see something concrete there.
Okay, so that's defense policy, industrial policy, trade policy, and foreign policy all bundled into one, and I have to show you why this is happening. This is the latest from the President on Truth Social. I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, capital D, GDNS, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer. Yeah, okay. I don't know if that's a response to the throne speech or what, but here we are. Setting aside, Sherelle, what the president is saying, I'm not going to ask you to do that. But what the prime minister is saying is, he sounds like they're in the pretty advanced stages of inking at least a framework agreement with Europe to start selling things back and forth, reduce the reliance on the United States, and build up capacity on both sides of the Atlantic to start, I guess, making weapons and building ammunition together, because with the U.S. going the way the U.S. is going, you just kind of can't rely on that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's what everybody who is, at the grocery store and looking at the prices and looking at their bank accounts, they're going, God, if only we could make more weapons in Canada, everything would be just dandy.
Well, I think they would like a better supplied CAF, maybe, the ability to give Ukraine things other than loans. I don't know. I think there's an appetite for some of that out there beyond, basic affordability challenges.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think
Yeah.
for a segment of the population, absolutely, there's a big appetite for it. I don't know if the appetite is massive amongst, the average Canadian citizen, like I said, who's looking to, figure out their day to day. Mark Carney said something interesting. He said he's not a fan of picking an arbitrary number and then trying to figure out how to spend up to it.
Yeah.
But he's kind of doing exactly that. We have the NATO commitments. He said we're going to hit that by a certain, point in time. And he's still trying to figure out how we're going to fulfill that commitment. And this is part of that. So yes, we have, as a country, we have a commitment we've made a commitment. NATO as a whole is going to be asking for more, and Canada as a member is going to be trying to figure out how are we going to fulfill that? How are we going to look like we are pulling our weight? And as everybody's moving away from the United States, and that is part of it, wanting to be sovereign, wanting to diversify where our money is going, that is still going to be part of the prospect of how are we going to manage to spend that money. Because the defense budget has always been the defense budget. It's been a matter of we cannot seem to spend the defense budget that we have, and that is what's going to have to change.
Yes, and Amanda, what I don't know if I've reversed engineered it from the Prime Minister's answer. I think he has done the assessment of the national security requirements and the basic requirements of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that goes past the 2%. So I think that's an easy, target for him to commit to. It's going 3.5% or even 5%, as Secretary General Ruda was talking about. That I think is more problematic there. But it seems like the disentangling it from the reliance on the U.S. and of sending 75 cents of every dollar you spend on munitions and stuff to America, that becomes a value proposition to Canadians and Canadian industry to buy into this, right?
Yeah, and this is the pitch that he made to Canadians, this idea that we've been over-reliant on the U.S., both economically and from a security standpoint. So he said really clearly, we're going to spend more. We're going to spend more at home. We're going to strengthen the Arctic. We're going to, he said, we're going to spend more sooner, and we're going to spend more with our European partners. So it was he was clear. He wasn't going to commit to a new NATO target per se, but I think he was certainly clear on both the direction and I think also kind of the appetite that he feels that Canadians have to do this at this time. He also linked it, which I thought was really interesting, to needing a fall budget, right? He said, and that is why we will have a fall budget, because we're not going to make these determinations next week or in the coming weeks.
Right.
These are things that we're going to have to spend more on, and we're going to need more time to do.
Well, it sounds like, Jordan, he's going to go to these summits, right? And that will give him greater costing certainty. So then they figure out where that goes into a fiscal plan. Whereas if you did do a budget this month, which I think a lot of us, well, not this month, but June, you'd have to tear it up in September, or your fall economic statement would be essentially a supercharged defense mini budget, it seems.
Yeah, well, I think they're obviously going into the NATO summit with a good sense of what they'd like to spend and how quickly they'd like to get there. But there is a real challenge coming for this government in terms of these budget commitments, because on the one hand, you have Prime Minister Carney talking about fiscal restraint, talking about cuts to planned spending, talking about getting it down 2%, which over time could be an effective cut. And at the same time, even for Canada to start to get to that 2%, you're talking like that, billions and billions, $14 billion of new spending to get us there, let alone going beyond that if we get to the 5% target that is likely going to be agreed upon at the NATO summit. So there is a bit of a collision course on the numbers there, and I can see wanting to push that conversation off a few months. But look, I think to the question of involving Canada in NATO rearmament in Europe, this is a smart thing for Canada to be doing. Defense integration with the United States is so significant here in Canada. It will be one of the very last spheres that is able to be separated. And so leadership sort of from the top to indicate that we're going a different direction, I think is really important. But there's a tension here with what we were hearing out last week about Canada potentially being in these discussions around Golden Dome. So, at a moment where NATO itself is in crisis because of what the United States is doing, where increasingly, we have a land war in Europe, and we're seeing that matters there are now sort of an ally, matters are for European allies without the U.S. Where is Canada going to be on that?
Yeah.
And I think it's smart for us to be making investments there.
But Tim, there's this tension, right, on defense, industrial policy, how you buy things, procurement and building things, and then the need for continental security with the United States. Because even if you move away politically, you can't move away physically, right? So Golden Dome may be nuts to some people, but there's going to need to be some sort of continental cooperation on these things.
Well, and also, as people in the military will tell you, our adversaries aren't targeting the difference between Calgary and Connecticut. We're one big landmass, and we're a target of opportunity. But I think first on the Golden Dome, I think Carney's actually played this pretty well, I think, because look, if we look at history, going back to Reagan, whenever any of these big, audacious, crazy, space-based defense things come up, they all fall apart eventually. And, Donald Trump may be the great deal maker, and you are, Mr. President, that, 3 years, this thing is probably not going to happen. So what does it hurt Carney to say he's part of the discussions? I think if Pierre Poilievre was Prime Minister, he would probably say the same thing. Go in there, be part of whatever these discussions are, and let the domestic politics of the United States sort it out as it always has. On continental security, we are always going to be part of that. We're part of NORAD, where we have been and will continue to be. I think the play that Carney and Macron and Starmer and others are looking at is like they're going to call Trump's bluff on Europe and say, all right, Mr. President, you don't want to do any work in Europe anymore for now. All right, we'll take that on. And how will you calculate that as it relates to your arbitrary number of 2% or 5%? And it'll be interesting to see how that discussion plays out at NATO. That arguably is something Canada with its other European-based NATO allies and other European-friendly powers could do on a short-term basis. Because this is all about timelines, right? This is a risk management exercise over 3 to 4 years, too. There are real reinvestments we have to do in the CAF, and then there are the Trump management exercises of the next 3 years.
Okay, look, I want to move on to the very historic moment we saw today for Canada at this critical time. King Charles delivered the speech from the throne today, outlining the new government's priorities, reaffirming the country's sovereignty, and officially opening the 45th session of Parliament.
I've always had the greatest admiration for Canada's unique identity. On Juno Beach, at Dieppe, on the Somme, at Beaumont-Hamel, at Ypres, and on Vimy Ridge, Canadians fought and died alongside our closest allies. Today, Canada faces another critical moment. Democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, and freedom are values which Canadians hold dear, and ones which the government is determined to protect. A confident Canada can seize this opportunity by recognizing that all Canadians can give themselves far more than any foreign power on any continent can ever take away. As the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free.
Well, much of the throne speech, of course, was written by the federal government, laying out its plans for the return to Parliament, and it was criticized by other federal leaders, saying it doesn't meet the mark. All right.
The phrase that came to my mind is that this is not a worker-centered throne speech. I guess another way to put it is it also struck me as a bit of a conservative light throne speech.
We did see a lot of the right slogans and political talking points, but no clear plans to get it done.
We will try, I will try to find common grounds in order to work together.
Okay, that's the next thing we're going to discuss here at the Power Panel. Sherelle, the sustained applause at the end for, as the anthem says, the true North is indeed strong and free. Very subtle line, whoever wrote that, for the king to say it. I just wonder, Canadians kind of rallied around the flag in response to Trump. I don't know if they rallied around the crown or the monarch, but still, it was an interesting moment to have, King Charles open up Parliament with that speech. What do you make of what we saw today?
Yeah, I mean, did it do its job? I think it did. If the idea behind it, aside from the actual procedural pomp and circumstances, to send that message to the U.S. president, yeah, I think that worked. I know that the U.S. ambassador, Hoekstra, he's said that, there's better ways to send that message, but I don't know if that's true, because to this specific audience, somebody who loves nothing more than, a big show, this is about as, for Canada anyways, this is about as big as it gets. And to have the King come over and be seen on camera with, Donald Trump's Canadian adversaries, if you want to call us that, being very chummy, glad-handing, getting the kind of welcome and having the sort of rapport that he can only aspire to. He has to be invited to go to the UK to have a state visit and get all that pomp and circumstance. And you have King Charles coming to us, and he is coming here and is in our backyard. So that is, I think, absolutely going to be having the right effect that they wanted it to have.
Amanda, I never know how effective these things are as a communications exercise, right? Because there's all this subtlety, like, he wore this medal and he had this particular ribbon. Oh, look at that maple leaf brooch the Queen is wearing. Like, I don't know if that level of subtlety works with the American president in the year of our Lord 2025, but it met the standard of the Hippocratic Oath. This did no harm, and it may have potentially done some good.
Oh, no, I think it did a lot of good. Maybe some of the subtleties, I don't know that everyone picked it up, but we're talking about it. I think that the reason why this worked is because it reinforced a lot of the themes that the Carney government wants Canadians to talk about and care about. Canadian identity, sovereignty, unity, and it was laid out by a prominent and respected, we'll call it third party, right? A global voice that is going to attract global headlines. This is about as good as it gets in terms of thinking through, how do we deliver this message in a new way? Remember, the monarchy hasn't been part of delivering a throne speech since the 70s. So even just the novelty of this happening in Canada, made it so that everyone was paying attention. I don't know that everyone's paying attention to our throne speech otherwise, but again, reinforced some of these themes. And I'll just take one moment to share. I think one of the most powerful aspects of this was certainly the line that was quoted at the end, true north, strong and free, but it was something else. It was this idea that Canadians are feeling anxious. They're feeling worried.
Right.
The globe, there's this unsettled feeling, and yet this presents a new opportunity to think big and act bigger. And I thought that part of the speech, this idea that there's new relationships to be forged, new allies and trading partners to work with, there's opportunity and hope and optimism. And I thought that some of that came through outside of the domestic stuff that they got into was really critical and will land well with Canadians.
So Jordan, I mean, certainly Canadians probably watch this in significant numbers, right? Live coverage on the networks and online. I don't know if it penetrated into the United States, right? I don't know. But certainly in the UK, when you're trying to do things with the government there, having the monarch, with the new Prime Minister being the former Bank of England governor during the time of Brexit, there's going to be, it's going to hit some of the notes in the United Kingdom. I don't know. What do you think of this today?
Sure, I think it's just as much of a flex about Carney's relationships in the UK as it is about anything else. And that's fine enough as a communication strategy. I think to Amanda's point, it's true that more Canadians likely tuned in and paid some attention to the throne speech than they might have otherwise if the king wasn't there. As to whether it's effective with Trump, we'll all watch Truth Social to know. But
well, the Golden Dome tweet, whatever you call those things out.
Sure. I mean, and look, and there's real limitations, I think, in terms of the King's ability to actually deliver a tough message about Canada's sovereignty. He can't be political, and so it is very subtle. And so, I too would question.
He can't be partisan, but sovereignty isn't political.
Sure.
When you're the sovereign.
Sure. But yet, he can't speak directly to the issue at hand, is what I mean. And, and I think rightly, Buckingham Palace came under some criticism for extending the hand to Trump not once but twice for a state visit. visit. And so there's maybe a bit of repair happening here in that. But, you know, when I look at the throne speech more broadly, and, you know, and I appreciate Amanda's enthusiasm and optimism, but I was so struck, like, today, you know, to hear that idea that this crisis with the U.S. and this crisis of the tariff war with the United States is a great opportunity for prosperity here in Canada. Look, like we just heard today that 8,000 people are being laid off at the Bay, okay? We have the highest unemployment rate that we've seen in the last 8 years outside of COVID last month. We have only about 40% of unemployed Canadians who can access EI. And there was not a word about any of that in the throne speech. So Canadians are worried, but they're worried in a very concrete, a very real sense in their own lives. And I think that the aspirational stuff that was put forward in here is all well and good for building on that communications momentum that this government is so wedded to right now. But it really does not touch the true crisis that a lot of Canadians are feeling right now.
Jordan's not wrong about that, and the data is very compelling, but I think in the hierarchy of needs to haul in Maslow here, Trump is still at the top of that pyramid. And so
well, he's the cause of a lot of these things, not the Bay specifically, but the other things.
All of this. I would just go back to what Trump said of Carney, or was reported to have said of Carney. Well, he likes the way he dressed. He likes the way he is. He seems like a good gentleman. So what have you seen today? If this was about Trump and getting, you know, him to buy in more, well, and to use Trump parlance, which isn't very erudite, it's this guy Carney. He's got juice. You know, he can haul over the King of England and get him here and have him do this. Oh, well, I like the King of England. He was thrilled when Keir Starmer said you can have a state visit. As simplistic as that may sound, as moronic as that may sound, that's the sort of stuff that it appears this president cares about. Who do you know? Can you get the right audiences? Are we going to be in the same places? It builds for him a level of credibility that the last prime minister wasn't able to achieve. Now, Mark Carney's challenge is to be able to maintain that in a positive way with a very, to be polite, erratic leader who could change his perspective on a dime.
Right. Okay. So, Sherelle, just as the last word to you. I mean, the thrones. Look, Mark Carney has been prime minister for 75 days. He was sworn in on the 14th of March. He won the leadership on the 9th of March. And just think, like, it's moving. There's a lot of things that have been happening. He's going to have his first question period tomorrow. He's already had a trip to the Oval Office, to the UK and to Paris. His first question period tomorrow. Like, now that he's got his cabinet, won his election, laid out his throne speech, we get to see him in Parliament. It's not Pierre Poilievre. It's going to be Andrew Scheer leading off. I mean, what are you going to be watching for tomorrow when Mark Carney takes his first question, assuming he goes?
Well, assuming, yeah. Maybe he'll want to sleep in a little.
Yeah.
I mean, it's late.
I don't know if he sleeps in. No, 5 a.m. may be late for him. I don't know. Yeah.
Takes a 2 p.m. nap. I don't know. How is he going to handle being questioned? That is something that we keep seeing, and he doesn't seem to love it. He doesn't seem to love being needled and having that pushback, and that is all that question period is going to be. And going up against Andrew Scheer, that is, I mean, you have Pierre Poilievre, and you have, and Andrew Scheer comes, you know, right underneath that in terms of being able to needle at somebody. So I think that'll be a really interesting vantage point of seeing how is he going to move going forward, because we haven't really seen him. We've seen him wander through politics, but we haven't seen him be a truly political animal, and that's kind of where some of these things are going to have to come to light.
Yeah, the pomp of today will give way to the pugilism of tomorrow, and we'll see, you know, how he handles all of that. All right, we got to leave it there. I want to thank you all. Thank you to the Power Panel, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Jordan Likeness, and Sherelle Evelyn. They're going to say goodbye, but there's still lots more to come here on Power and Politics. Reaction from the official opposition to today's throne speech, Conservative MP Adam Chambers is standing by. And former Prime Minister Kim Campbell was among the dignitaries in attendance at the throne speech today. What she had to say about the King's visit and its symbolism. And the Power Rankings panel is here to talk about who's up and who is down on Canada's political stage today.